In the late 1990s, Dr. Sarah, a young medical resident at a large, reputable hospital, was assigned to the night shift in a quiet, dimly lit ward. One night, she was checking in on a patient, a man who had been admitted in a deep coma after a car accident. His condition was stable, but he hadn't moved in weeks. As Dr. Sarah passed by his room, she felt a strange unease, but thought nothing of it. However, when she turned back to check the patient, she noticed something chilling. His eyes were open and staring directly at her. Thinking she had imagined it, she turned to leave, but when she glanced back, once more, the man's eyes followed her, never blinking. The next night, the same thing happened. Dr. Sarah became increasingly unsettled, and the hospital staff started to report similar strange occurrences. One day, the patient was found dead in his room, but no one could explain the unsettling sensation they all felt when passing his bed. Staff members claimed they would see his eyes following them long after his death. It became known as the ghost of room 313, and many believe his restless spirit still watches the living. John, a hospital maintenance worker, had worked at Glenwood Hospital for over 15 years. On one quiet evening, he was tasked with repairing some lights in an old, unused wing of the building. The hospital had recently renovated most areas, but this section was still largely forgotten. As John walked down the long corridor, the dim, flickering lights cast unsettling shadows across the walls. He reached the end of the hallway and opened the door to a storage closet, only to hear the distinct sound of footsteps behind him. Thinking it was another worker, he turned to speak, but found no one there. The footsteps continued to echo, growing louder with each step. His heart began to race, and he quickly retraced his steps back down the hallway. But no matter how fast he moved, the footsteps remained in sync with his own. When John returned to the maintenance office, he mentioned the strange occurrence to his colleagues, but they were unfazed, having heard similar stories about the old wing. Eventually, hospital staff discovered that the wing had once housed a psychiatric unit that was closed after a fire took several lives. People believe the spirits of the patients still roam that hallway, unable to escape. Catherine, a nurse working in the ICU of a large hospital, had been working the night shift for several months when she started to feel a presence in the room. The ICU was normally a place filled with life or death moments, and Catherine was used to the intensity, but there was something different about the atmosphere during her late night shifts. One evening, while tending to a critically ill patient, Catherine felt an overwhelming sense of dread. The hairs on her neck stood on end, and she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. As she turned to check on another patient in the far corner of the room, she saw a figure standing at the foot of one of the beds. The figure was blurry, its features indistinct, but it was wearing an old-fashioned hospital gown. Catherine quickly turned on the lights and looked around, but the figure was gone. Over the following nights, she would encounter this shadowy figure, always in the same spot, silently watching over the patients. Some staff believed it was the spirit of a long-dead nurse who had worked at the hospital many years ago. Others thought it was the lingering presence of a former patient who had passed away tragically. Either way, Catherine was certain the figure was not of this world.